A woman named Cecilia gets out of bed in the middle of the night, being careful not to wake her husband Adrian. She takes out the sleeping pills she used on her husband and quietly takes a bag filled with clothes. She then adjusted the hallway camera to keep an eye on her sleeping husband. Cecilia goes to her husband's laboratory to deactivate the cameras and alarm. She is anxious not to make any noise and frequently checks the camera to see if Adrian is still asleep. Cecilia is about to escape through the garage when their dog tries to follow her. She takes off his electric collar, but the dog accidentally triggers the car alarm, so Cecilia rushes to jump over the fence just as their bedroom lights turn on. She runs through the woods until she reaches the road where she anxiously waits for her sister. Her sister Emily later arrives, but then Adrian suddenly appears yelling and breaks the car window. As they manage to get away, Adrian sees the bottle of pills on the ground. 2 weeks have passed, and Cecilia is now living at her friend James' house. She is still scared to go outside, but James manages to convince her to check the mailbox. Cecilia is startled by a man, so she quickly runs back inside. The next morning, while Cecilia is covering her computer camera, her sister Emily comes over. Cecilia is worried that her husband might have followed her, but then Emily reveals a shocking news: Adrian has passed away. She confides to James and her sister how Adrian is very controlling, and that he used to abuse her physically and emotionally. The next day, Cecilia finally found it easier to step out of the house. She retrieved the mail by herself, and her efforts were applauded by James and his daughter, Sydney. Cecilia and Emily gets invited to a law office where Tom, Adrian's brother and lawyer, reads Adrian's final wishes. He had left Cecilia $5 million, with the condition that she wouldn't ever commit a crime. That evening, Cecilia surprised James and Sydney with gifts to express her gratitude for their care. James receives a large ladder, while Sydney receives a bank account with enough money to attend fashion school. They celebrated, and Cecilia went to her room, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She later noticed the front door is open, and when she goes to check outside, she finds nothing, although a second breath can be seen near her. While the girls are sleeping in Sydney's room, something yanked their covers and began playing with the room's lights, waking Cecilia. She felt as though someone was sitting in the chair, so she tossed a blanket, but no one is there. However, as she pulls the mantle, it seems as if someone is standing on it. Cecilia calls for James, and he hurried into the room. He and Sydney didn't see anyone, so he reassures Cecilia and tells her not to let Adrian's memory haunt her. The next day, Cecilia goes to a job interview. The interviewer asked to see her work, and when Cecilia opened her bag, her work was missing. Her anxiety attacks again, causing her to pass out. James brings her to the hospital, and the doctor tells her to take a rest while they wait for the lab result. Later that day, the doctor tells Cecilia that her fainting episodes were due to high levels of sleeping pills in her system. To her surprise, she spotted the bottle of pills she used on Adrian. She and James meet Adrian's brother Tom to tell him about the sleeping pills. Cecilia insists that her husband is alive, and since he is a scientist, he might have found a way to become invisible. She also has a suspicion that Tom knows about it, but then he shows her a picture of Adrian's deceased body. Cecilia visits her sister, and Emily confronts her about the upsetting email she sent to her. Cecilia insists that she did not send her an email, and perhaps it was Adrian who did it. Emily does not believe her and urges Cecilia to seek help. Cecilia later checks her sent emails and finds the message that Emily was talking about. Sydney finds her in tears, so she tries to comfort her. As soon as the girl stands up, something hits her. She calls for her dad, suspecting that Cecilia did it. Despite Cecilia's attempts to explain, she couldn't convince them that she wasn't the one who had harmed Sydney, so they left her alone in the house. Cecilia believed that Adrian is there, so she sits down and pleads him to leave. As she tries to call his phone, Cecilia hears it ring from the ceiling. She goes to check it, and there she finds his phone, together with a key and her design work. Cecilia hears a noise, so she grabbed a paint can and throws it on the ladder, revealing the outline of a man. The man goes running, and Cecilia used the opportunity to climb down. She goes looking for him, and it seems that the invisible man has rinsed off the paint. Cecilia is suddenly lifted and gets thrown around the house. They engaged in a struggle until Cecilia managed to escape. She rides an Uber to the house where she used to live with Adrian. Cecilia enters the house, accompanied by her dog. They go to her husband's laboratory, and there she finds what seems to be an invisibility suit that her husband invented. As she is taking out the suit, the dog barks and rushes out, alerting her to the presence of someone else. Cecilia sought refuge in the dressing room, but the invisible man followed her. The dog scares the invisible man, and Cecilia used the opportunity to escape. That evening, she meets Emily in a restaurant, and Cecilia tells her sister about her findings, which could prove that Adrian is alive. Moments later, a knife suddenly floats beside her and cuts Emily to death, then ends up on Cecilia's hand. A customer sees the lifeless Emily and screams, causing a panic in the restaurant. Cecilia gets pinned down immediately and arrested. She wouldn't stop screaming about the invisible man who killed her sister, so they put her in an asylum and sedate her. Before she passes out, the invisible man whispers to her. James and another detective interrogate Cecilia, and she mentions having proof about Adrian, but she couldn't disclose it because he is in the room. When the other detective left, Cecilia asks James if he believes her, but he couldn't answer. Later, a doctor informs Cecilia that she is pregnant, and it is Adrian's child. The following day, Tom visits her and explains that since she committed a crime, Cecilia forfeits the trust fund from Adrian. She insults Tom and compares him to his sociopath brother. That's when Tom reveals that he is working with Adrian, and he gives Cecilia two choices, either to forfeit the money or keep the baby and go back to her husband. She refuses his offer and secretly pockets one of his pens while he is distracted. That evening, Cecilia takes out the pen to cut her veins while saying he won't get the baby. When the invisible man stops her, Cecilia grabs and repeatedly stabs him. When the security guard enters, he sees the damaged suit. He tries to tase him, but the invisible man turned it on him. Cecilia runs away but gets intercepted by two guards. As they are taking her back, the invisible man reappears and kills them. Cecilia grabs a gun and chases after him. Outside, the man manages to choke her, and he threatens to harm Sydney if she does not comply. When he leaves, Cecilia steals a car and rushes home. She calls James and tells him that his daughter is in danger. Meanwhile, Sydney suddenly wakes up after hearing a noise. She takes out her pepper spray and sprays all over, making the invisible man stumble on the floor. Sydney runs away screaming, but the man managed to catch her. James later arrives and the invisible man starts beating him too. Cecilia suddenly appears, discharges a fire extinguisher at the man, then shoots him dead. She removes the mask, only to discover that it was Adrian's brother, Tom. A police unit breaks into Adrian's house, and they find him tied up in his basement. James tells Cecilia that Adrian is just a victim of his brother, but she does not believe it. She knows that Adrian set everything up, including his own brother. That evening, she returns home where Adrian is waiting for her. They sat down for dinner, and he apologizes to everything he has done to her. Cecilia pressed him to admit everything, but he kept insisting that his brother had been controlling him. Meanwhile, James is just outside the house, listening to their conversation. Cecilia starts crying, and Adrian comforts her, but when he mentions the word surprise, she is convinced that he really was the invisible man. She goes to the bathroom to freshen up, and Adrian seems agitated while waiting for her. Moments later, he grabs the knife and takes his own life. When Cecilia sees him, she comes running and promptly calls 911. She then positions herself outside the camera's field of view, sits down, and watches Adrian's demise. James rushes to the house and finds Cecilia is about to leave. She informs him that Adrian had taken his own life, but James notices the invisible suit in her bag. He asks if it was her plan all along, and Cecilia says that the camera and the recording proved Adrian killed himself, to which James just agrees. Cecilia leaves the house, finally free from the controlling grasp of her psychopath husband. Did you like our movie recap? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. To be updated for new movie recaps, hit the notification bell.